Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the rLounge. Some folks get kicked out of the family home. Others get kicked into the guest house, where the rent is high, the rules are strict, and the only thing lower than the square footage is their dignity. Today in the rLounge, when you try to snatch someone's inheritance and lose spectacularly, you don't just end up in the doghouse. You end up paying to live in it. They said I was too immature for the will, so I made them pay rent to live in my house. I got the call about my grandfather's death while I was in the middle of a video game tournament. My phone kept buzzing, and when I finally checked it during a break, I saw 5 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. When I called back, a somber voice introduced himself as my grandfather's attorney. "I'm very sorry to inform you that your grandfather passed away last night in his sleep." The controller slipped from my hand. My grandfather had raised me since I was 12, after my parents died in a car accident. He was my only real family. Well, the only one who acted like family anyway. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect. My Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert showed up with their 3 kids, all in their 30s. I hadn't seen any of them in years, despite them living less than an hour away. They always had excuses for why they couldn't visit Grandpa, but somehow found time to call him when they needed money. Throughout the service, I could feel them watching me. I'm 28, and according to them, I've never grown up. They've always looked down on me for being a freelancer instead of getting what they call a real job. Aunt Diane cornered me at the reception. "So, are you still playing video games for a living?" she asked with that fake smile of hers. "I'm doing fine," I replied, not bothering to explain that I make more than enough to support myself. I've learned it's pointless to try to justify my life choices to people who've already made up their minds about me. The will reading was scheduled for 5 days after the funeral. I showed up early, still processing my grief. Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Wilson, greeted me warmly. He'd always been kind to me whenever I visited Grandpa. "Your grandfather spoke of you often," he said. "He was very proud of you." That nearly broke me. I managed to hold it together as Aunt Diane, Uncle Robert, and my oldest cousin Bradley arrived. They barely acknowledged me, whispering amongst themselves as we waited for the reading to begin. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat and began going through the formalities. I wasn't expecting much, maybe some personal items or a small sum. Grandpa had never been flashy about his wealth, though I knew he was comfortable. "And to my grandson, I leave my primary residence, all its contents, and the remainder of my estate, valued at approximately $2.8 million. The room fell silent. I stared at Mr. Wilson, certain I'd misheard. "That is absurd." Aunt Diane was the first to break the silence. "He can't possibly handle that kind of responsibility. He's too immature." Uncle Robert jumped in, insisting that their father hadn't been in his right mind and claiming he'd been declining for years. Mr. Wilson remained composed, explaining that their father had been of sound mind when he updated his will 6 months ago. In fact, he'd been professionally evaluated to eliminate any doubts about his mental competence. Still, Robert wasn't backing down. He turned and pointed at me, accusing me of manipulating Grandpa, saying he must have spent the last few years buttering him up for this exact outcome. I couldn't even respond. The truth was, I visited Grandpa at least once a week, sometimes more. We'd watch old movies, play chess, or just talk. I never asked him for money, not once. Mr. Wilson went on, stating that while they were within their rights to contest the will, their father had anticipated this reaction. He had left behind a letter explaining his decision in detail. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. I tucked it into my jacket pocket, not wanting to read it in front of them. Aunt Diane hissed as they stormed out. "This isn't over." I sat in my car for nearly an hour before I could bring myself to open Grandpa's letter. His words brought both comfort and pain. "My dear boy, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next. I'm leaving everything to you because you're the only one who ever visited me without wanting something in return. Your aunt and uncle only showed interest when they needed money. Over the years, I've loaned them over $300,000 that was never repaid. I've kept records of everything in my study. Use what I've left you wisely, and know that I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become." I moved into Grandpa's house the following week. It felt strange being there without him, but also comforting, surrounded by his things. I spent days going through his study, finding records of every loan to Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert. Each folder contained the original agreement, copies of checks, and notes about their excuses for not repaying. True to their word, they filed to contest the will. I used some of my inheritance to hire the best estate attorney I could find, a sharp woman named Ms. Reynolds, who specialized in contested wills. She assured me that this was one of the strongest cases she had seen. After reviewing Grandpa's documentation, she noted that the recent update of the will, the mental competency evaluation, and his detailed records all worked in our favor. I was sorting through Grandpa's clothes to donate when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert standing there with suitcases. Uncle Robert announced that they needed to stay here for a while, already pushing past me into the foyer without waiting for a response. I stepped back, stunned by their audacity, as Aunt Diane followed close behind. She avoided my gaze as she explained that they had been evicted from their rental. According to her, this was still family property, and they needed somewhere to stay while their case moved forward. I wanted to slam the door in their faces, but something stopped me. Maybe it was knowing what Grandpa would do, or maybe it was just shock. After a long pause, I finally spoke, telling them that they could stay in the guest house temporarily. They acted like they were doing me a favor by accepting. The guest house was a comfortable 2-bedroom structure at the back of the property, originally built for Grandpa's housekeeper, who had retired years ago. I should have known they wouldn't respect boundaries. 2 weeks later, I noticed extra cars in the driveway. When I went to investigate, I found all 3 of their adult children had moved in too. I told Uncle Robert that the guest house wasn't designed to accommodate 5 people. It simply wasn't meant for that many. He replied dismissively, "Family helps family. You've got this whole house to yourself. Don't be selfish." Over the next week, I noticed they were using excessive amounts of electricity and water. They left messes around the property and helped themselves to items from the main house without asking. When I confronted them, they acted like I was being petty. I called Ms. Reynolds for advice. "They're staying on your property without a formal agreement," she explained. "You have 2 options, formal eviction or creating a lease with strict terms. Given the pending case, I'd recommend the lease. It establishes boundaries while showing you're not heartless towards family." I drafted a lease agreement with her help. The terms were straightforward. $3,000 monthly rent, the market rate for a property like the guest house in our area, utilities to be paid separately, and strict rules about proper use and additional occupants. When I presented it to them, you'd think I suggested they sell their organs. Aunt Diane screeched, "You're charging your own family rent? Your grandfather would be ashamed." I faced Uncle Robert and his family, my voice steady as I told them that Grandpa would expect them to respect my property. I pointed out their hypocrisy in contesting my inheritance while simultaneously benefiting from it, stating they had to either sign the lease or find somewhere else to stay. Uncle Robert's face reddened as he protested that they couldn't afford $3,000 a month. Unfazed, I responded that it was the market rate and I wasn't giving them special treatment when they were trying to take everything from me. They grudgingly signed the lease, clearly believing they'd win the case and get the property anyway. When the first rent payment came due, they claimed they needed more time. I reminded them, with no room for debate, that the lease stated payment was due on the 1st, with no exceptions. They eventually paid, but made sure everyone in the extended family heard about my greed and how I was extorting them during a difficult time. The court date for the will contest arrived faster than expected. Ms. Reynolds was brilliant, presenting Grandpa's letter, the financial records showing the loans, and testimony from his doctor about his mental competence. The judge didn't take long to rule in my favor and even ordered my aunt and uncle to pay my legal fees. I expected them to move out after losing the case, but instead, they approached me the next day with fake smiles. Aunt Diane, attempting to smooth things over, suggested that now that the unpleasantry was behind us, we could tear up the lease and go back to being family. I held firm, stating clearly that the lease stood. I then brought up the matter of family obligations, pointing out that I had documentation of the $300,000 in loans they never repaid to Grandpa. As the inheritor of his estate, I expected repayment with interest. Their faces fell, and Uncle Robert sputtered that they couldn't possibly repay that amount. I offered a compromise, explaining that they could work off the debt by maintaining the property and paying reduced rent for a fixed period, or I could take them to court for the full amount immediately. They reluctantly agreed to my terms, having no other options. I wasn't naive enough to trust them, though. I had security cameras installed throughout the property, including the guest house exterior. My caution proved warranted. A month later, I noticed items missing from the main house: an antique clock, some artwork, and a few pieces of Grandpa's coin collection. The security footage showed Uncle Robert and my cousin Bradley entering the main house when they thought I was out and leaving with items hidden under their jackets. I confronted them with the evidence. Uncle Robert insisted that they were merely borrowing the items, claiming they held sentimental value for them as well. I countered sharply, pointing out that borrowing didn't involve sneaking in and hiding what they took. I gave them 30 days to vacate the property, adding that I was pursuing legal action for the stolen items and unpaid loans. They pleaded for another chance, insisting they had nowhere else to go, but I stood my ground. The next day, I found a note taped to my door. "You'll regret this. Family should come first." I took the note straight to my attorney and filed for a restraining order. The next 30 days were tense, but I stood my ground. They'd taken advantage of Grandpa's generosity for years, and now they were trying to do the same to me. I wasn't going to let that happen. They wanted to call me immature? Fine. I'd show them exactly how mature I could be by holding them accountable for their actions. As the eviction date approached, I prepared for the worst. I had no idea how right I was to be concerned. Update 1. A month later. So the 30-day eviction period ended, and surprise, surprise, my aunt and uncle refused to leave. I gave them an extra day just to be sure there wasn't any confusion about the date, but when I went to check the guest house, they were still there, acting like nothing was wrong. When I knocked on the door, Uncle Robert stood defiantly and declared that they had decided not to leave, insisting that it was their family home too, and that they had rights. I didn't bother arguing. I just nodded and walked away, which seemed to confuse them. They probably expected me to beg or threaten, but I'd already prepared for this scenario. I called my attorney from the main house, and she initiated a formal eviction process through the sheriff's department. It took another 2 weeks, but eventually 2 deputies showed up to enforce the eviction. I stayed in the main house watching through the security cameras as my aunt and uncle put on a performance worthy of an Oscar. Aunt Diane wailed about being homeless while Uncle Robert tried to argue with the deputies. When that didn't work, they switched to claiming I was mentally unstable and dangerous. The deputies, to their credit, remained professional and gave them 1 hour to gather essential belongings before they would be physically removed. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. I'm suing them for the stolen items, which were never returned, and the unpaid loans to my grandfather. My attorney thinks we have an excellent chance of winning, especially with the documentation and security footage. I also hired a private investigator to track down the stolen items. It turns out my lovely relatives have been selling Grandpa's possessions through various online marketplaces and local pawn shops. The PI has already recovered several pieces, including the antique clock that was my grandfather's favorite. The buyers were understandably upset to learn they'd purchased stolen goods, but most have been cooperative once the situation was explained. The whole situation has gotten even messier because my cousins have started sending me threatening messages. Apparently I'm the villain for making their parents homeless. Never mind that their parents have been mooching off relatives for years. I've had to get a restraining order against all of them and upgrade the security system at the house with additional cameras and a new alarm system. I've started planning renovations on the guest house. Once it's ready, I'm going to convert it into a proper rental property with a professional management company handling everything. At least then I'll get reliable tenants who actually pay rent on time. Just when I thought things couldn't get more ridiculous, I received notice that my aunt and uncle have filed for bankruptcy, obviously trying to avoid paying for the stolen items and loans. My attorney wasn't concerned. Certain debts, including those from willful theft, can't be discharged through bankruptcy, she explained. We'll still proceed with the case. We had our court date last week for the lawsuit. The judge was not impressed, and my aunt and uncle's behavior, especially after seeing the security footage of them stealing items and the financial records of the loans. He ruled in my favor, ordering them to pay the $30,000 for the stolen items and my legal fees. He also acknowledged the $300,000 in loans as legitimate debt to the estate. Since they claimed they couldn't pay a lump sum, shocking, the judge established a payment plan through wage garnishment. They'll be paying me back for the years to come. The most satisfying part was watching their faces when the judgment was announced. They genuinely seemed to believe they would get away with everything. The entitlement is staggering. I've learned they've been staying with various family members, wearing out their welcome at each place. According to my cousin, who apologized, they stayed with his parents for 2 weeks before being asked to leave after they borrowed his mother's jewelry without permission. They're still telling everyone that I'm heartless and cruel, so I finally decided to end the gossip once and for all. I compiled all the documentation, Grandpa's letter, the loan records, security footage of the theft, and the court judgment, and sent it to every family member. I included a brief note explaining that while I didn't want to air family dirty laundry, I also couldn't allow false narratives to continue. The response has been overwhelmingly supportive. The guest house renovations are underway. The lawsuit is settled, and I'm slowly rebuilding relationship with the family members who genuinely want to be part of my life. I've also started sorting through Grandpa's belongings properly, finding photos and mementos I never knew existed. I still miss my grandfather terribly. As for my aunt and uncle, I've heard that they're telling people they're homeless despite staying with relatives. I don't expect to hear from them directly anytime soon, but I'm prepared if they try anything else. Man, the audacity of your aunt and uncle, showing up with suitcases after trying to contest the will? They really thought they could screw you over, lose in court, and still crash at your place like it's some kind of family resort. Wild. Also, turning the guest house into an actual rental? Perfection. They really thought you were the loser of the family, and here you are getting paid every month because they can't stop tripping over their own greed. I'm sorry, but that's hilarious. Grandpa's probably somewhere watching all this unfold like, that's my boy. What do you make of this? Would you do anything differently? Share your thoughts with us below. And thank you for joining us today in the rLounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time, And please put your chair back where you found it.